Hey there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing and how we keep our rivers healthy for fly fishing, as well as for their own good. So today's interview is with a group called the Beacon Network out of North Carolina, and specifically two gentlemen named Jared Dubin and Miguel Huerta, who live out there, who are deeply connected with, in this case, the South Toe River, but also who have been really heavily involved through their nonprofit, the Beacon Network, in a lot of really interesting cleanup efforts following Hurricane Helene way back in 2024. And for those of you who follow disasters or news cycles, you probably know that whenever something bad happens, which included a ton of just horrific damage and flooding and carnage in North Carolina following the hurricane, you sort of hear about it for a while, and then once the emergency passes, it's no longer sexy for the news, and people stop talking about it. But the work doesn't stop just because the news stops talking about it. And in fact, what happens afterward is usually you have this huge flurry of activity around the event, humanitarian efforts, emergency interventions. And then once that's done, everybody just sort of forgets about it and goes home because it's not politically expedient to talk about it anymore. Recovery work is long and arduous, sometimes expensive, definitely complex. And so a lot of times folks that live in these areas, the locals who care deeply about them, are left to sort of figure out this crazy patchwork of other organizations and policy issues and the work that actually has to be done to restore the habitats that were damaged. And that's what Jared and Miguel have been working on. Now, full disclosure, we actually recorded this interview way back at the end of 2025, like early in the fall. And for one reason or another, between season breaks and me being out of the country and then just random upload schedules and everything else, we have not managed to publish it quite yet. So it's coming out a few months after I had hoped, but the truth is that the content really hasn't changed at all. The work out there is still ongoing. They're making good progress. The policy challenges that we talk a little bit about in the interview are still around, right? Those don't go away. And really, these guys are digging in, along with a lot of other really cool folks in these communities, for what will be a very long process toward recovery for these rivers. And that matters not just to those of us who love aquatic life and fish and fly fishing, but also to people who just enjoy the rivers for their own sake and who believe that these places are worth preserving because they're wild and beautiful and part of our heritage. I think Miguel and Jared really get that at a level that a lot of folks don't. It was a lot of fun to catch up with them. I actually have a long history with Miguel working on political stuff out here in Colorado, and so it's sort of cool to see him go off and do this new thing that I also care about in North Carolina. But it's a great interview. It's a wonderful time talking to these two gentlemen about what it takes to stand up and say, I'm going to do something about this instead of just watching passively. And candidly, I learned a lot, both from them and from the conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. We'll hop in there in just a second. In the meantime, before we do, I wanted to remind you that if you are enjoying the show, it's time for the periodic plug, which is to please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you happen to listen. They really do help. I love hearing your feedback, so feel free to actually write out a review. I do read all of them. If you want to drop me a note at backcountryflyfishingpodcast@gmail.com, I read those and respond as well. And you can also always find us on our Instagram page, Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast. Shoot me a DM. I read those. I might take a couple days to get back to you if real life intervenes, but I will always get back to you. I love hearing from you guys. I love the feedback. And as the show grows and develops, hearing from more of you guys and seeing those reviews is incredibly helpful. So if you are one of us in the backcountry fly fishing cult, please take the time to go and do that if you are so inclined. And otherwise, I'm real happy you're here. And let's go ahead and jump into today's interview. We're here today with Jared Dubin and Miguel Huerta, both from the Beacon Network. Miguel is the Community Partnership Manager at Beacon, and Jared is the Executive Director. And we are here to talk about all things river health and maybe a little bit of politics there in North Carolina where they are located. So thanks, guys, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, maybe we could just start with both of you introducing yourselves, telling us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in Beacon, and then what you're doing for Beacon currently.
Sure. So I guess I'm from New Jersey. I grew up in the Appalachian foothills, and I always had a lot of forests around. And knew I wanted to settle down in like a kind of more remote place, but didn't really want to settle down in the north because it's pretty crowded up there and the forests are pretty small. Um, so I wound up here in North Carolina, uh, in Western North Carolina, about 6 or 7 years ago. Um, I came looking to put down roots and really start like being a part of lasting community because I noticed traveling around a lot in my 20s, I was just things were always developing and then I would cut them off when I was leaving. And that developing community seemed to just take time. And that was what I was primarily interested in. So I moved here. Um, and then as far as Beacon goes, the idea sort of it seeded back during Occupy, which is also when I met Miguel. Um, so that was 2011, when I was seeing all these different causes and activists and community leaders coming together and like talking about the problems that uh, connect us and that we're all struggling and how those problems are connected and not just like it wasn't just about healthcare or the environment or the economy. It was about all those things like and what's behind uh, the corruption of them. Spoiler alert, a little bit of finance. But anyway, so I just was I became very interested in connecting community, and then a few years later, after I'd graduated, I noticed that social media platforms were really going the way of the dogs, just monetizing heavily, and the functionality was falling apart, and it was harder and harder to get your message out and actually connect with people and see what was happening in the world. And at the same time, more people than ever were using social media, so they'd really captured the whole world as an audience, and then started to just degrade the functionality until I felt like we're like in this just shopping mall with everyone shouting at each other and your friends are there too, but so are a million people you don't care about and a million things you don't need. So I wanted to develop a technology, a platform that was a pure social networking application that facilitated communication and connection and awareness, and then actual action in the real world, something that uh, people could use to be more involved in their community rather than just sort of withdrawing and feeling paralyzed or else just being distracted. So I came up with Beacon in those days, but didn't really have the time to work on it. And also thought it was such a no-brainer that somebody else would get to it, and I didn't really care to like make it happen. I just wanted to see it exist. And then 5 years later, fast forward to the pandemic, and it still doesn't exist. And like we need these community tools now more than ever. This is back in the pandemic years. Because the point of Beacon is really to like let people know what's happening in your community, who are the players, what are the resources, where's the need, where's the abundance, how do you connect those pieces? And then whenever the whole world shut down, out here we've got tons of farmers who had produce that was being sold to restaurants that were now closed, but we also had people who couldn't afford food because they weren't working. So like there's a natural loop to be closed. Um, so anyway, I got on unemployment during the pandemic and I was like, okay, well, this is my chance to make Beacon into a reality. So I incorporated as a nonprofit, and tried to get an app developed for like 3 years, maybe, in different fashions, pursuing different strategies, and never really got traction. And finally put it aside, did landscaping for a year out here. And then when the hurricane hit, the need for mutual aid and direct action became very, very obvious to everybody. And there was a lot of funding available to help communities like ours. So I applied for some of it, and now Beacon is fully funded for the next year, and we're able to work on this. I'm working full time. Miguel's working part time. We have another full time helper, and it's been awesome to like be able to serve our community and fill in the gaps where things might not be happening or could happen. So yeah, that's a little about us.
Yeah, and then as far as my part in all this, so I'm from Colorado, grew up in the Denver area and always connected with nature, camping, hiking, grew up yeah, hunting and fishing, never quite fly fishing yet, but Ross, you've invited, so I'm going to take you up on that. That'll be our episode 2 there, but yeah, and I ended up pursuing a master's in social work in Philadelphia, and that's when I met Jared, as he mentioned, and we connected through, yeah, the Occupy movement, where a lot of these conversations were happening about the future, how to create a more equitable society. And that was a beautiful idealistic space, and also like a lot of practical things were happening and organizations formed out of that, that years later are still creating important change in Philly, and I'm sure in other places around the country where that movement happened. And Jared moved down here, and I, consistently would visit, and got the opportunity to move here last May in 2024, and had a beautiful summer learning about the region, and swimming and tubing in the river almost every day before we, saw kind of the power of the river in a new and terrifying way in September with the Hurricane Helene. Uh, and then as a social worker and somebody who is really passionate about creating spaces for people to come together and solve issues, and building programs that facilitate that community building, it's been really powerful to apply my skills and see them needed and affirmed here in this new place, and as an outsider and a newcomer, able to really get involved and connect with community in a powerful way that I probably wouldn't have been able to without the flood happening. And so I've been honored to be working with Jared and helping connect the original vision of Beacon to the here and now, and the on the ground work that we're doing.
The honor is all ours. Miguel has been indispensable in the effort since the storm, and it's just a true privilege to work with my dear brother. So
Thanks.
yeah, he's an amazing guy.
Indispensable. Nobody's ever said that about me, Miguel. I've been working my way, but
I
it
know.
hasn't happened yet.
All the flattery here today.
So the way that I got connected with these guys is interesting. I mean, everybody knows that I work in government relations when I'm not fishing. I keep trying to get to a place where I do more fishing than politics, but it hasn't happened to me yet. So I got connected with Miguel working on something completely unrelated to fishing out here in Colorado. It was actually related to foster youth, which was an awesome project. And so I would pick the word indispensable too, if I had to. It was a lot of fun working on that project. But when I found out that he was working in North Carolina, specifically on stream restoration and ecological issues after Helene, I knew that we had to talk. And I think, we've got listeners all over the country. A lot of our folks are in the West. We don't have hurricanes in the West, right? We have rivers, we have mining, we have runoff. We certainly have weather-related events that affect our streams, but we don't have anything quite as catastrophic as what Helene did to the Appalachian region. And actually, let me pause. Do you guys say Appalachian or Appalachian? I don't want to get hit. Sometimes I get slapped if I say it wrong.
I grew up saying Appalachian up north, but down here it's definitely Appalachian.
Appalachian.
The strong CH.
Yeah, Appalachian.
Appalachian.
I just don't think that that's phonetically correct, but I'm gonna say Appalachian, and
It's like a very random word to describe this ginormous region that doesn't, I don't think, I looked up the origin and it's not, I think it's okay either way.
But yeah, the Blue Ridge Mountains, right? Is that
Blue
more
Ridge
specific? Yeah.
But that only applies to the area down here. When you go up north, the blue phenomenon of the isoprene from the trees is not present as much.
I mean, for the conversation about Helene's impact
Yes.
area,
Yeah,
maybe
we
the
could do
Blue
that.
Ridge Mountains is a good.
all right. Well, Jared gave us a little sneak peek into the kind of sciencey stuff, which is what got me so interested in this. We're talking about the isoprenes. So I think what's really fascinating is that neither of these guys fly fishes yet. I'm going to try to get both of you into it, but you both are very intimately connected to the rivers and the streams in your region there. And I wonder, for those of us who are not in the Appalachian region, walk us through kind of the ecology of that area, the rivers in that area, and what the hurricane meant for the rivers and the communities that depend on the rivers here over the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, I would say first off, I mean, people here weren't expecting a hurricane either, and a lot of folks and even climate scientists and whatnot have kind of had identified this region as somewhere relatively insulated from many, climate challenges. And so we're like hundreds of miles from a coastline and 3,000 feet elevation, 2,000, 3,000 feet elevation. No one was really expecting a hurricane, first off. And then, yeah, but curious to hear what you would say to the
Yeah,
question.
and to that point, that's kind of why I moved to this area, was to avoid the increasingly precarious climate changes that were happening. And I'd been living in Colorado for a year, and the year I was there were terrible fires, and it was just like smoke everywhere. And I was like, I want to go somewhere where there's water. Haha, irony. 6 years later, it's the water that became the disaster. But yeah, the that it is the water that brought me here. Like I said, I grew up in the north, in the foothills, and it was a pretty lush place in spite of all the development. Just lots of creeks and rivers everywhere, and I just kind of assumed that was what like the whole planet looked like. And then I started to travel a lot and realized how special that was. And out here, it's even more. I mean, we live in this river valley that is just, I don't want to say pristine, but nearly pristine. It sparkles with mica. There were mica mines all over here. It's super windy. There's like, it's a gentle rapids, but when it rains, it can be a little bit fun to take the kayaks out. Um, and there's just, it's pretty much undeveloped. There are like houses and private properties along the river, and a few farms here and there. There was an enormous golf course that we're hoping does not get turned back into a golf course now that it's been washed away. But for the most part, it's not the original forest that was here before, but it is forested, and you see how our river fared a lot better in the storm compared to those rivers where there's more development. Um, Less got stripped away. But even with the forest here, so much did get stripped away. And like having spent some time out west, the rivers now here look a lot more like the rivers out there, with the bare rock banks here and there, and just busted a little wider, more rocks and gravel. Um, but already, after the storm, everyone's like, what's going to happen with all this sand and this silt? Nothing's going to grow in it. And it's amazing. Like, there are very few places where nothing is growing. And we're trying to get native seed down here and there, wherever the earth's been disturbed. But I'm also confident that where we don't get to, something will grow. Maybe not the thing we want, might be a nasty invasive that we'll have to deal with later. But I'll even say, and this might get you or me canceled, but uh, some of the parts of the river with like the invasive, like bamboo or knotweed, actually did hold up better than, places with nothing. Definitely best to have the natives there. We're working with this river cane, which was super abundant in Western North Carolina and all across the Southern Appalachian region up to Virginia, at least, in the past before colonization. And it was a major staple of the Cherokee people, who used it for all sorts of things. And through learning from them and partnering with other organizations, we've been trying to propagate the river cane and get it back to where it belongs along the rivers and creeks. So, yeah.
What about, I was like really surprised to learn too about the microclimate here, and that it's, what, temperate rainforest, and there's all of these unique species like the hellbender salamander that I was just started learning about, and these like indigenous mussels that are like endangered, and just like a lot of cool life in the rivers as well.
Yeah, the elk toe mussels and the hellbender, and yeah, lots of stuff. Yeah.
So I think one of the most interesting things about this is that, I mean, so when you bring up like native versus non-native, I won't get canceled for you talking about bamboo. Now, if I were to start talking about like, putting brown trout in a stream full of native brook trout over there, then I might get assassinated. But,
Uh-huh.
also the beauty of not being paid to do this is that nobody can cancel you because you just, do it for fun.
Yeah, right, right.
um, I hear what you're saying. And I think what's so interesting about it is that, fly fishers get really, for good reason, focused on trout, right? And so it's all about like what kind of fish are in there and how are we supporting the fish and how healthy are the fish populations. And that's where the focus of fishermen tends to be. But that's such a small slice of what goes on in a river, right? I mean, the trout are part of an ecosystem, but they're not the whole ecosystem. And really, if the river is not functioning properly, and that goes all the way down the chain, right? All the way down to the vegetation, what the banks look like, what kind of bugs are there, mussels, salamander presence. I mean, this is unrelated to rivers, but I hiked up to a lake just last week and found a bunch of tiger salamanders in there, which told me out of the gate there are no trout in there, right? Something is off in that situation because those particular amphibians are a sign that they're not being eaten, and that means something's probably off in the ecology. And I think a lot of fly fishers don't connect their specific interest with the streams with sort of the broader ecology of the streams. And I think some of that's just because we like to catch fish, right? So it's simple, but some of it is also because there's never really an occasion to do that, right? You show up to a river and it's sort of a complete put together ecosystem and it works and there are fish in there and you catch fish and you drink beer and it's good, right? But when something like Helene happens that disrupts that ecosystem, I think then you really have to sit down and think about it, because the process of restoring it is about a lot more than just checking on the fish. You know, it's like, oh, there's a brook trout. We're good, right? And this region of North Carolina is a very famous fishery for brook trout in particular, but there are other types of trout that have been planted there. And then you really got to sit back and say, okay, well, what do we need to do to get the river back to a place where it's functioning, not just for the fish, but for everything else? And so I wonder if you could talk, Jared, a little bit, and Miguel, a little bit about some of the specific changes that you've seen in the stream since Helene, some of the ecological changes that you've seen, and just how you and other groups have gotten involved in it from just a conservation perspective. Because I think there's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram between the fishing community, who obviously care a great deal about the rivers, but also a lot of folks who just, you know, fishing's not their thing. They care about the rivers because either they're just important to them historically or culturally, or they just like being in the river. I mean, there are a lot of reasons you could be connected to these streams. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the specific changes you've seen, and then sort of how you've seen these other groups activate around potentially fixing those changes.
Yeah. I feel like this is an area where a lot of the political spectrum that does not normally come together winds up coming together, because we have fishermen, we have sportsmen enjoying the forest, relying on the ecosystem, who did get involved and are involved since the storm. And then we have people who are like hippies and environmentalists and just lovers of the forest who naturally want to protect things. And it's been really inspiring to see those factions work together. And I think that, yeah, I don't think recovery would have gone the same if it wasn't for the passion of fishermen in particular, who were really concerned about the trout. Like you said, there's an organization, Trout Unlimited, around here that specifically is trying to make sure the trout recover. We haven't worked with them directly. But there's all these considerations, like the banks are now way more exposed, so they're getting a lot more sun on the water, which raises the water temperature, which I've heard can affect the trout. Um, there seem to be a lot less fish, I'll say, like paddling and kayaking. I'm just noticing, especially the larger fish. There used to be like a lot of trout a lot of the time, and they do stock the river here, so it is kind of a seasonal thing. And I think there are fish that aren't stocked that keep coming back. I don't understand the life cycle of fish at all. Maybe we could get into that at some point, because I just don't get how they keep appearing here and there. Um, but yeah, it's less, but they're there, you know, and all the birds that prey on the fish are still around, so that tells me that the fish must still be around too. We still have the herons, the great blue heron, the osprey, the kingfisher. I see them pretty much in the same numbers I saw before, which is really great. Maybe a little bit less of the osprey. I see the otter tracks, so I know they're around. But I definitely noticed less variety and less numbers among the fish, and I'm sure that'll just continue to come back. I don't know what they did to not just be wiped out during that storm. Like the way, I guess they find the eddies and they hang out under some rocks. Yeah, I don't know.
The depths of the river has really been interesting, and the shape of it and how it's changed just in my limited time here. But like the spot at the bottom of our driveway that we swim and hang out in a lot is way deeper than it was pre-Helene. And then there are the other areas that are way more shallow, or where the river is like split up into multiple kind of streams almost, because of tons of new rocks that weren't there before. So those are some other like shape changes that have been interesting, and I wonder how they affect the flow of life in the river.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe some folks who aren't from that region, I mean, even if you saw the news, you just don't have a sense of how catastrophic Helene was, right? And how much it changed these rivers. And I think fish are remarkably adaptable. I mean, all of nature is remarkably adaptable because it's been having to do it for a really long time. But it does get impacted. And Miguel, what you said there is really important, right? I mean, these rivers are fundamentally different now. They're deeper in places where they didn't used to be. That means that some of the riffles where a lot of the bugs hatch that the trout eat are probably not there anymore, which forces the fish to move around. You have new braiding and new islands, like you said, in the rivers, which changes the whole ecology of the region. I mean, it's a pretty complicated thing. And Jared, what you said there about seeing fewer fish, but still, signs of at least a reasonably healthy fish population and birds that are preying on them, and all of that stuff is good and promising. But I also think that there's a tendency sometimes to go out and kind of stick your head in the door and look at it and go, yeah, it looks okay, right? And then just leave it alone. And what I think is really cool about what Beacon has done and what this community of folks who have kind of gathered around the rivers out there in North Carolina has done has been that you really haven't done that, right? I mean, the news has stopped talking about it. It's not really in the public discourse at this point. People have moved on to the next crisis that we need to talk about. But there's been a real focus on doing not just the immediate work of recovering from the disaster, but the longer term work of making sure that that recovery is successful and able to get back to where these streams were before. And number one, I really admire that. But number two, I wonder if you could talk a bit about some of that work. I mean, how has it looked for you all? I'm sure you've had challenges. We don't have to get too political unless you want to, and then we can. I'm happy to. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you've plugged into that kind of longer term work and some of the challenges that you've faced trying to keep after it.
Yeah.
Even just setting the scene too, like the river here, they say like rose about 30 feet at the bottom down here. Our neighbor's house that was on the river, completely gone, smashed down into the corner, the bend of the river, and just the amount of debris has been wild. Like when we've led these community cleanups from the end of October, so a month after Helene through June, Beacon helped co-lead about 20 or 30 community cleanups where volunteers came together in different spots, mostly in the South Toe River Valley, but also Cane River and North Toe. And just imagining like all of your worldly possessions and all the things that like are around in human life jumbled out of place and jammed in a culvert or like into the bank of a river, stuck up in the trees. I mean, that's just the like reality that we kind of found ourselves in. And there's still so much to do. The number of cars that are still in the waterways likely causing pollution issues, and it's just really staggering. And so that's where like kind of Beacon's been jumping in and seeing the community come together to tackle those issues. And then how do you remove debris but leave maybe the woody debris that's gonna help slow down the water in the future and provide ecosystem support for things, and like where do things need planted versus where is it best to leave alone? How do we advocate for our community and prevent just the quick and cheap solution, which is destroying the ecology and riverbeds? Those are some kind of big picture things I feel like we've navigated. What would you add?
Yeah, I would say we've been very lucky, and different regions have fared differently since the storm. There was a sense right afterwards that the response to the disaster could become a disaster in and of itself if certain measures were taken to remove all of the debris. Because like Miguel said, it's everywhere. And particularly in bends of the river, you'll have a house just pancaked up against trees like 20, 30 feet in the air. And for the longest time, we're sitting on our riverside and we're looking across the river, and way above us is like 2 chairs stuck up in the tree by where the water was before. And so, like I said, we're lucky. Our county chose to work with local contractors instead of the Army Corps of Engineers to do the debris removal. And that's made a huge difference here. And as far as us being able to collaborate with the debris removal process and regulate it and restrain it, other areas have had a lot more trouble, where the Army Corps was for a long time unwilling to communicate, unwilling to listen, and did a lot of secondary ecological damage that didn't need to be done. In one particularly egregious case, they actually stripped a whole river island that wasn't even impacted by the storm and took a whole bunch of legacy debris, is what it's called, debris that was there before and should stay there for habitat reasons. Um, so here in the South Toe, there's a really high ecological awareness. One, because the river is so well preserved and beautiful, and it's a destination for people all over. And two, because a lot of the people here tend to sway more liberal and more environmentally concerned in the first place. But even in the larger conservative Yancey County, there is a strong environmental awareness because of the love of the people for their own independence, being able to rely on the land for farming, for fishing, for hunting. There's just an immense respect for the mountains and for the land here. And that's what's brought everyone together. There is like this unfortunate misunderstanding on either side, like there are some people who like don't want any debris removed and, don't want I mean, it's not really as much of a thing, but there's this painting of both sides as wanting these extremes, and I think both just really want to do what they think is the best. And the Army Corps in particular, they've never dealt with cleaning up a hurricane in the mountains before. So a lot of the practices that they would use on a coast where there's not forest to deal with and there's not further erosion problems to worry about don't work out here when they're stripping the whole bank and leaving a bunch of exposed soil, which then washes into the river, and then the river has more dirt in it, and that affects all the stuff living in there. Um, but the partnerships have been incredible. We work with the county, we work with the contractors that work with the county, we work with environmentalists and conservation groups, all on different projects and in different capacities. And it gives me a lot of hope for the cooperative potential of this region for everything in the future. So
one of the conservation groups, the South Toe Stewards, that we work really closely with, and that Jared started the cleanups with, they've been doing some kind of like volunteer monitoring of the cleanup contractors, and they'll actually like stop the contractors and go and get stuff like kind of handpicked, maybe with kayak over, and grab these things so that they don't have to bring the big machines in. And so there's a lot of like kind of soft touch efforts like that take maybe a lot of time, diligence, effort, expertise, volunteers, but are kind of saving stretches of the river from the contractors having to bring in the machine. Because what's that saying about when your only tool's a hammer or whatnot, and it's, there's exactly other ways to deal with things, but it takes more time and maybe isn't cost effective. So we've got to find volunteers to do that work.
And
I think
we've even
go ahead, Jared.
So there's one exciting prospect to do the work ecologically friendly way. There's a stretch of the river that's super inaccessible that has about 10 trailer chases. It's just downstream of a campground where a bunch of RVs got washed away and smashed. And we've actually gotten, it looks like a tentative go-ahead to plan to have helicopters come and grab those chases and pull them up and then unload them in a parking lot nearby. So we're getting volunteers together to help hook up the stuff to the helicopters, and and that's like the kind of thing that like it gets all the good old boys excited and the contractors excited and the environmentalists. It's like a really awesome coming together sort of thing project.
Yeah, I think maybe the stuff is always so complicated, and it's much more complicated, I think, than people think it is, right? And so just to kind of, you guys have mentioned a whole bunch of different groups there, and just to kind of paint a picture around it, you've got the big disaster happens, right? You see the press conferences, the White House gets involved, FEMA gets involved, you have all sorts of people showing up with bags of cash for a little while, and then they all sort of go away, right? And then what you get is this crazy political patchwork of the state legislature, which obviously provides some level of funding for a lot of this work, but then the work itself being left up to individual counties, and then those individual counties going out and contracting with whoever. It might be the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, it might be a private contractor, it could be whoever, and you wind up with this sort of, these rivers are not small waterways, right? So they're covering large distances, and you have this sort of patchwork of stuff. And what I find really fascinating about the work that you're doing is that you have just out of the gate, people with very different interests, right? Like a conservation group obviously is coming at it from a different perspective than a contractor who is being paid to do a certain thing. The counties have their own interest in what they're trying to do, and they're trying to balance the political interest of all these other organizations that are involved. Jared, you mentioned earlier that most of the conservation groups skew toward the left side of the political spectrum. A lot of the sportsmen's groups skew toward the right side of the political spectrum. And so you're trying to kind of get all these folks to sit and work together. And you're trying to find solutions for what's actually going to work for the river as opposed to just what's the most expedient or who has the best relationship with, the Board of County Commissioners or whoever is making the choice about it. And I know that there's been some really interesting stuff over the last several months with relation to what the state's doing with funding, how this all gets put together at the county level. And I think one of the coolest things about what Beacon is doing is that you guys have been able to serve as sort of a little bit of an intermediary, right? Where you can kind of help pull these community members together for volunteer projects or for conversations or anything else. And I know there are a lot of other organizations doing that. But I think that's the real secret sauce, right? It's less about how a specific contractor handled this project or how this county did it versus how this county did it. But the ability for all of those groups to come together around legislation or anything else and say, this is what we want. Maybe we all want it for a different reason, but we all want healthy streams and waterways has been really cool and pretty inspiring. And I know you guys have had some pretty big wins over the course of the last several months. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's transpired there and then maybe give us a sneak preview for what you think comes next.
Sure. Yeah. Big wins. Um, Definitely getting so much trash and debris out of the rivers has been great. And that's just been a nonpartisan thing. It was good to start jumping into this work with something that everybody could easily agree on, which is that we need to get rid of this trash. So that just got a lot of enthusiasm from the start. And to date, I believe we've removed about 70,000 pounds of debris and trash from the waterways and neighbors' lands. So that's been huge. We've planted hundreds of river cane plants. We've distributed tons of native plants. We've started seeding native seed, but that's just getting going. And then on a larger level, I think the biggest win is just the collaboration that we facilitated and ensuring that we were pretty concerned when the debris process came here to the South Toe Valley that it would be a disaster. And I think a huge win has been keeping that from happening. And I think that if the people had not been involved, if the South Toe Stewards and Blue Ridge RC&D and ourselves and others hadn't been watching and ready for what was coming, the debris removal process would have been a lot more destructive. So being prepared and also coming to the table, trusting the best intentions from everybody, trusting that everybody was acting in good faith and that if somebody was stripping a riverbank, it's not because they hate the environment or hate the people living there. It's just because they thought that's the best way to do it. So by going in, trusting that everyone's there for the right reason, it really opens up a lot of possibilities for collaboration. And the partnerships we've built then that still endure now are really making a huge difference that I think are going to last beyond the hurricane recovery, which is going to take years. We might be still doing recovery work 5 years from now. But when things do finally get to whatever the new normal is, which I don't think there will ever be a normal again, I don't know, maybe in some decades, uh, we'll all still be around partnering and making this community a better place. Because the people who are in it, they want everyone to recover from the hurricane, but like Miguel was saying earlier this morning, it's like, if you don't have a house because of the hurricane, we want you to have a house. But if you don't have a house because of other reasons, we also want you to have a house. Like, we want to take care of the environment because the hurricane ruined it, but we also just want to make this place as resilient as possible. So that's the biggest win. I think that this area has been brought together and is so much stronger because of having gone through the storm. And a lot of the things that are dividing a lot of the country right now are not really as big a deal to us here because we just don't have the time. And the people who, you'd think it's hard to sit at a table with a bunch of people who probably have different ideologies and different ideas about where things should go, but it's been really easy because there's just so much work to do and we do fundamentally agree on helping each other and making things better for ourselves and our neighbors. So
I've seen a real, like, yeah, the importance of keeping the focus on those most impacted and listening to them as experts. So, for example, like with the best intentions, like the most recent, or like with the topic of the most, like, assuming best intentions, the state um, disaster relief bill, the most recent one, there was like a mandate for counties to contract with the Army Corps of Engineers, and that was, relatively quickly removed before the bill proceeded through the legislature. And I think that's because a lot of folks were paying attention to Jared's point, and many counties were like not okay with that, and local organizations like ours, inquiring and asking questions. And there was a lot of noise before there needed to be an organized effort in opposition to that. And it was, quietly removed, as quietly as it was put in there. And I think that that's because like people are paying attention. And I think another aspect of Beacon's work on the human level, which is kind of where my expertise like comes in, is helping with our county's long-term recovery group and coordinating the efforts of all of these awesome nonprofits, many of which have sprung up because of Helene, and these coalitions and efforts that are doing different things. We're doing new builds, or we're repairing people's homes, or we specialize in bridges, or we get people furniture after they've lost everything, or, Beacon's doing the stream bank restoration and proliferating native seeds, all coming together and trying to coordinate our efforts. And there's a lot of challenge in that, but it's been really cool to see the desire to do that, and for Beacon to be able to kind of test, or our vision of the app idea, the technological solution that Jared first conceived of for Beacon, and seeing like in a real scenario on the ground, like what technological limitations are there, what challenges are there to coordinating these efforts. And it's set August, halfway through August now. Winter's not too far away, and there's still people without housing. There are people with inadequate housing or leaky roofs. There are people still without bridges to their homes. So there's just a ton of work to be done and a lot of need still, but we're hosting resource fairs around the county. People are showing up to that. We're coordinating volunteer efforts, kind of streamlining and unifying our volunteer efforts rather than having a bunch of small groups of people trying to work in their niche. We're trying to coordinate that. And that's, I think, been a huge success.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that there's something to be said for, I can almost feel some of our salty fly fisher guys in the background that are like, well, man, I don't care about if somebody has furniture or housing. I just want to, how are the brook trout? And that's, number one, probably morally incorrect, right? But even if we let them skate on that one, it's also incorrect from the long-term view of the health of the river, right? And so what Miguel said there, I think, is really important to look at, because there are all of these different groups who are coming in and helping people with stuff that has nothing to do with recreation or the stream itself even. And that matters because the larger the coalition is that you can build around these rivers, and the more people can connect with the groups that care about the rivers and that work with them, the more voices you bring to the table. And the more voices you bring to the table, the more effective you're going to be in the political process. And Miguel mentioned there was a recovery bill moving through the North Carolina legislature that had a bunch of good stuff in it, including additional funding for recovery efforts, but did include a provision that would have taken away counties' abilities to choose who they contract with to do this restoration work, and default them to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which, with all due respect to everybody involved, their default action is bulldozers most of the time. That's just what they know how to do, and so that's what they're going to do. It's Miguel, you said it earlier, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And so being able to bring together a group of people with very widely varied interests who maybe wouldn't have been part of this if you hadn't had organizations like Beacon and others going out and helping people with food, with housing, with furniture, with whatever else they might need, is why that was pulled out. And because that was pulled out, you now have an opportunity to proceed with much more effective, much more environmentally friendly restoration efforts at the local level instead of having the state dictate something to you from the top. And so I just kind of want to zoom in on that because I think sometimes people check out when it stops being about fishing and the river itself. And from a political perspective, because this is all political in the end, right? I mean, it's a governmental question, really, in a lot of ways. If you really want to be able to protect the streams that you care about, you've got to bring other people to the table, whether or not they have anything to do with your chosen activity. And I think you guys have done a really tremendous job of doing that. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. And to that point, I think that outdoorsmen that I've, in my family and the culture, I feel like always has immense respect for the landowners and the people that live around and steward the beautiful spaces that folks come to visit too. And so I think what would those rivers be if the outdoorsmen coming to fish there weren't concerned about the well-being of the neighbors that live on those rivers.
And that was one of my original inspirations for Beacon. It was originally meant to be environmentally focused, and the idea was that a strong community is the best equipped to protect its own environment. Like having government regulations is fine, top-down laws is fine, but it's really a strong community alongside a river or a mountain or a forest that's going to make sure that ecosystem stays protected. And as you say, the more plugged in that community is to itself and to the outside forces, the better it'll fare. So yeah, that's kind of where we aim to be.
Yeah, well, you guys are doing awesome work. So if somebody wanted to learn more about the Beacon Network or support the work you're doing, where would they go and how do they do that?
Go to our website. It's www.thebeaconnetwork.org. And there you can learn all about us. You can donate if you feel so inclined. You can get in touch if you want to learn more or have some cool ideas or just,
visit and volunteer. We host groups from out of town that want to come and help out and do river cleanups or planting or anything like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us today. This has been really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. This has been great.
Okay, that'll do it for today's interview with Jared Duman and Miguel Huerta of the Beacon Network in North Carolina. I know that this is sort of a highly specific topic, but I also know there are an awful lot of you out that way who love fly fishing because I hear from you all the time. And if you are looking to get involved or interested in helping out, these guys might be a great place to start. Even if you're not, it was an incredibly informative episode about people who are doing what I think is pretty incredible and really pretty hard work to make sure these rivers stay healthy, even in the wake of a horrible catastrophe like Hurricane Helene. So I hope you guys are having a great time out there winter fly fishing. I have not gotten out as much as I would like to over the past few weeks, but I plan to change that shortly. So stay tuned on that front. We will be back in 1 week to close out season 5 of the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, tease you a little bit with what's to come in season 6, and maybe talk about a couple interesting things on the way out the door. But until then, stay out there, stay warm, stay on those fish, have a great time, and I'll see you back here next week. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. Just remember that doing the work's always harder than talking about doing the work.